cells look like in comparison to domain eukarya? Connor?
They have the cell, but it's just stringing everywhere like the balloon.
Very good. What is that kind of cell called, Connor?
Prokaryote?
Prokaryote cell. Very good. Okay. So the cell is here, and instead of having a defined nucleus, the DNA is just kind of floating all over the place. Okay? Called a prokaryote cell. Now, there are a couple, so let's do this. How many kingdoms are there in this domain? I'll give you a hint. There's 6 total. How many of them go in with this category? Show me on your fingers. 4. Okay. There are 4 kingdoms in domain eukarya. Kingdom Animalia, Kingdom Plantae, Kingdom Fungi, and Protista. On your fingers, show me how many domains are in this, how many kingdoms are in this domain? 1. Very good. Only 1 kingdom. No. How many kingdoms are there in this domain? 1. Okay? Each of these only have 1 kingdom, which is why we talked about if you're describing this domain, you're automatically describing this kingdom because there's only 1 option, right? And same thing here. So that's one thing these two have in common. They both only have 1 kingdom. What's another similarity? A characteristic that both of those domains have. Connor?
They both don't need oxygen.
Very good. They both do not need oxygen most of the time. Do not need, and then this is the chemical formula for oxygen. Brooklyn, another one. The letter? Unicellular. What does that mean, Brooklyn? Very good. The entire organism is made up of just 1 cell. Anything else? Ian?
I know the 2 main differences.
Okay, I guess the last similarity is that they're both prokaryotes that we already mentioned. So, go ahead and give me 1 difference, Ian.
So one difference is bacteria has some cell wall made of something I forgot about.
You remember the name of the molecule?
Yeah, I just don't know. It starts with an E. I know that.
P.
Starts with an E.
Cell walls made of peptidoglycan.
I was close. The E was second.
Okay. What's another difference? So yeah, this domain has cell walls made of peptidoglycan. This one does not. What's another difference? Jacob?
One of them lives in harsh conditions and the other doesn't.
Good. Which one? Which one lives in harsh conditions?
Archaea.
Archaea. Very good. Okay. So we're going to say found in harsh conditions or environments. Okay. Anything else? Ian?
For bacteria, some of them can be autotrophic.
Some of them are autotrophic. Could be auto or hetero. Good. There are a few others, those are the main ones. Okay? So what we're going to do today now is we're going to look at the characteristics of each of those 6 kingdoms. Alright? We went ahead and set up our paper yesterday. So note number 4, so on the back of that domains chart, we went ahead and set those up. So you should have all of the first boxes labeled, yes?
No.
No? Okay. We'll do that real quick. Stop. Alright, so in the first boxes, underneath the first column, you're going to write the names of each kingdom. Now, I color coordinated them, you don't have to, but I just wanted to show you that these 4 are all part of domain eukaryote, or eukarya. Okay, Plantae, Animalia, Fungi, Protista. This one in green, Eubacteria, he's in his own domain. And then this one in red, Archaeobacteria, he's also in his own domain. Okay? Now, for the notes, we're going to look at characteristics of each kingdom, and we'll fill them out across as they go. So, We'll start with plant A. We'll look at the cell structure of organisms in kingdom plant A. Then we'll look at how they get energy. Then we'll look at how they reproduce, and then we'll list some examples. Then we'll go on to Animalia and do the same thing. Okay? But before we start, and I give you the characteristics to write down, I found something kind of cool on the internet that will show you what I'm talking about when I say that cells are extremely small. Okay? So when we first look at an organism to decide which domain it falls under, we look at the size of its cells, right? And we say, okay, does it have a nucleus? Does it not have a nucleus? Okay? But you can't just look at it and see that. It has to be under a microscope. Okay? And here's what I mean by that. Hold on, it's okay. I'm going to put it back up there in a minute. There's mental. Oh, here it is. Okay. Now, here's what this is a size comparison chart. Okay? Raise your hand if you've ever seen a coffee bean before.
No.
Yeah.
Okay, they're like this big, little bean size. Okay? If a coffee bean was this size, in comparison, a grain of rice would be this size. Raise your hand if you've eaten rice before. Okay, you know, one little grain of rice, that's how this would look in comparison to a coffee bean. Okay? This is a sesame seed. Do you see this tiny little gray dot right here?
No.
You see now?
No.
Now?
No.
Okay, that's a grain of salt. So, again, size comparison. If this were a coffee bean, this is how big the grain of salt would be. Okay? Now, if we get a little smaller, this is an amoeba. That is one example of a unicellular organism. Okay? Now, so here's the amoeba. If I zoom back out, that's how small it is in comparison to a coffee bean.
But can you do all of them?
I'm going to.
I thought they were invisible to the naked eye.
They are.
You may be able to see a tiny speck, but you wouldn't be able to see its subatomic parts or subcellular parts. Okay? So, here's where we go. So we zoom in a little further, we get to amoeba, paramecium. This is a human egg cell in comparison. Okay, this is what we come from. Look how small it is in comparison to a grain of rice or a coffee bean. Okay, so go a little bit, zoom in a little more. Skin cell. This is what a chromosome looks like. That's what your DNA wraps up into. Okay, but what I really want to show you is, watch this. That is one atom.
Carbon atom? Wait, we can even see that.
Okay, not without an electron microscope.
No, even with that on the drip, we still can see it.
Oh, I see what you're saying. You want me to zoom out all the way? Yeah, it's way too small. Okay, so this is the smallest unit we know of. Everything in the world is made up of a combination of these kinds of things. But look how small they are in comparison.
I can't even see it already. I can't
see it. I can't even see it.
I cannot see it anymore.
Oh, we're nowhere near.
Oh.
We never ate so long.
And there's the coffee bean.
Okay,
so when I'm talking about small, I mean small. Yeah.
I thought it was a video.
Mm-hmm. Hush. Alright, so, talking about characteristics of the kingdoms now. Okay, so, here we go. We already wrote these down. So, for domain eukarya, we have these 4 kingdoms. Why do I have this one in green and these 3 in purple? What makes this one separate or different from the others? It's still eukaryotic, it still has a nucleus, but what makes it different? Ian?
Oh, it's plants.
It's not plants, that's plants.
And also, I didn't get the last one on the.
You'll get it in a minute, don't worry.
And what is the eubacteria again? Like the
Domain, bacteria. Okay. What makes this one different? Micah? No, it doesn't have its own domain. That's the other two. We'll get to in a minute. This is in domain eukarya, along with these three. They're all in the same domain or category. Layla?
I think it can be unicellular.
Unicellular.
Oh, I was just gonna say it's because it's different.
No. Unicellular. Okay? So I use different colors. Do purple represent complex multicellular organisms? This one is the only unicellular one within this category. Now, the other two categories, kingdom U bacteria, which is in domain bacteria, and then Archaebacteria, which is in its own domain, they're also unicellular. Okay? This is the only one that's part of the eukaryotic category, but is unicellular. Nod your head, does that make sense? Alright, good. So, you already read that. For Kingdom Plantae, instead of doing it on a slide, I will come back to this, but I want to do it on the paper instead. I think it's a little easier that way. So, no. Alright, here's Plantae. For cell structure, these organisms have a nucleus, meaning they are eukaryotic. They have a nucleus, meaning they are eukaryotic. Most of them are multicellular. The vast majority. Now, the reason why we say most of them, in almost every kingdom, there are a few exceptions to the rules. Okay? But in this case, we're talking about most of them being multicellular. How do they reproduce, or how do they get energy? Sorry, they are autotrophs, which we know means they use sunlight to get energy through a process of photosynthesis. How do they reproduce? They reproduce by seeds. Some plants reproduce differently. We'll actually talk about that in the spring. Talk about that a little more in the spring. But typically they reproduce by seeds. And then the example that you have to write is rose. However, you could write other examples if you choose. Daisy, dandelion, tulip, orchid, carrots, grass, oak tree. Yes.
Instead of rose, could you just put flowers?
You have to have this one because on the test, if I give you an example of a rose, you gotta tell me which kingdom it falls under. So you have to have that, but you could put something else.
Well, if it was a flower, you know.
Excuse me?
The flower and the rose are the same thing.
Correct. But some people don't, they like to have exactly what they're gonna have. Okay? Alright, next one, Animalia. Cell structure. These are also eukaryotic, meaning they have a nucleus. And they are multicellular. Okay? How do they get energy? They eat other organisms. We call that a heterotroph. How do they reproduce? We already discussed how all animals reproduce from eggs. That does not mean that they develop a hard-shelled egg that then hatches, okay? But it does mean that they all started as an egg cell. Sometimes that egg cell develops into a hard-shelled egg. Sometimes it develops into a live animal that is then birthed by the mother or father in the case of seahorses.
But platypuses have like hard shells.
Mm-hmm. Correct. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Sometimes, technically us humans can lay hard eggs.
No. Sometimes in this kingdom, there are animals that lay hard-shelled eggs. Sometimes in this kingdom, there are those that don't, aka us. Examples, again, you have to write lion, but obviously there are many, many other examples. Matthew?
Could you tell us the size of the animal? For the example.
The size of the animal?
For the example.
You know the size of the lion.
Do I know the size of a lion? I'm confused.
That's what I'm saying is, could we write the size of like the examples for each kingdom?
Sure.
If you know them.
If you know them. I'm not sure what you would write. Like big? Sure. Alright, next one. We're going to finish with the eukarya, and then I'll show you the pictures for each one. So we got 2 more to go for this one. Fungi. That's the next kingdom. Cell structure for fungi. They have a nucleus, meaning they're eukaryotic. And they could be multicellular or unicellular. Now, how we get energy is very interesting. Think about how we get energy, right? We put food into our mouths, we chew it up, we swallow it, and the digestive juices in our stomach break those down and absorb the nutrients from it. Okay? Now, fungi do something similar but a little bit different. Instead of putting that material into their body and then digesting it, they actually secrete or release the digestive juice, put it onto whatever it is they want to eat, let the juice sit there and break it down, and then they slurp it up.
Ew.
So, I'll say it again. The mushroom or the fungi, whatever example it is, typically they release the digestive enzyme onto whatever it is they're going to eat. Then, once that thing is like pre-digested, pre-broken down already, then the fungus will come over and slurp it up.
That's disgusting.
It's kind of gross. So, they get energy. It's very small. I'm going to zoom in. They make a chemical. If you can't fit all of that, just put some of it. Make a chemical that digests the surface they are on and then eat the digested material. So, complicated way of saying they are heterotrophs. But I do want you to know that because it's kind of cool. They make a chemical that digests the surface they are on and then they eat the digested material. Matthew?
In Minecraft, so every once in a while you might find a fallen tree,
Mm-hmm.
and if you're lucky, you'll find mushrooms on it.
Ooh.
And when I say if you're lucky, then you can break the mushrooms and then you can make a mushroom stew.
Oh, so you get some food?
Yeah.
I don't like mushrooms either.
I love it. You bring it on my
Connor?
So it would kind of be like if you poured citric acid on a steak and then drank it.
Kind of, yeah.
Food died.
Jacob?
What if a mushroom accidentally squirted a human?
I don't think it wouldn't break them down necessarily.
Pretty sure it's like
Yeah, it would have to be a pretty intense type of digestive juice.
like a chat.
Hold on 1 second. Oops. Okay. How do they reproduce? They reproduce by spores. I'll explain that in just 1 second. Alright, raise your hand if you ever kicked a mushroom before. And it goes poof, and all the dust flies everywhere. Each of those individual little dust particles is a spore. Okay? If that falls somewhere where it's suitable for growing, a new mushroom will grow. That's why sometimes your mom will get mad if you stomp on mushrooms in her yard, because she doesn't want the mushrooms, and you just spread them all over the place. Okay? Now, to get rid of a mushroom, it's typically better to dig it up, right? Or to cut it off. That way it's not, the spores don't fly everywhere. But the mushroom, well, the way they reproduce is they develop those spores, in time, when the mushroom is ready, it will release those spores in order to try and grow more of itself. Okay? However, if you stomp on it before it's time, you spread them all over the place. Okay? So, examples, mushroom, mold, and yeast. Those are all examples, of organisms that are
We have to have all of them.
in the fungi kingdom. Yes, you get to have all of them. Oops.
What's mold?
Mold,
Oh, mold.
mold, yeast, and mushrooms.
What's
Yeast is the kind of fungus, it's like a fungi type, like a fungus / bacteria, but it's what goes in bread, like bread dough, and causes it to rise and bubble.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise it would just be.
You can also have, yeast is also a fungus that's present in the human body, and when you get too much of it, like on your skin or something, it causes it to itch really bad. It's called a yeast infection.
That's an again.
You can eat bread. Luke?
I don't honestly eat mushrooms that much, but my younger brother, in our old house, there was always mushrooms growing there. Like, not always, but like in the front yard there's a lot of mushrooms sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
My younger brother, every day he'd be like, oh, these darn, not my younger brother, he would say, these darn mushrooms, and he would like kick them into the street, and then every day they would appear, because I guess the spores were spreading.
Yeah.
These darn mushrooms!
He's making it worse every time. Yikes. Alright, next one. This one, we gotta hurry a little bit, because this one takes a minute. Alright, Protista. I'm gonna show it all to you one time. Protista. These are cool. Okay? I'm gonna show you in just a minute what they are. Protista are organisms that have a nucleus, so they are eukaryotic. Most of them are unicellular, meaning they're composed entirely of one cell. Manny, are you ready? They're also heterotrophs. Now, when single-cell organisms eat something, it's not like what you're thinking. They don't eat it and it goes to their stomach and they digest it. They're just one tiny cell, which we saw is just super small. So, when that happens, they typically suck in whatever they're going to eat, kind of like a vacuum. They absorb it into the cell and then they break it down and get the nutrients from there. Okay? Any question?
Could you zoom in a little bit?
I can try. Is that better? Okay. Now, they reproduce by dividing or budding. Let me explain what that means. Yikes. Trying to get, this is Euglena, just so you know, which I'll show you in a minute. Okay, dividing or budding. So, here's dividing. Okay? Typically you have a cell with something like this, right? You have the nucleus in the middle, and it has all the DNA in it, right? Now, the DNA inside of the nucleus, that's like the instructions for how to build a cell. So, if this cell wants to reproduce and create another cell, it has to have another copy of those instructions. So, the first thing it will do is it makes a copy. So, I'm going to draw my second copy in pink. Alright, so it doubles up. This nucleus is super full. It's like jacked up, full of stuff. Okay? Sure. Then, after this, the cell will begin to split. Okay? So it will look something like this.
Like this weird shape.
Okay? Here's one copy of the DNA, one nucleus, and the other one. Okay? Now, what's happening is the cell is trying to split into two. So it's pinching in the middle. So it started like this, okay? Then when it comes down here, it's pinching in the middle, and eventually it will split into two pieces with two new cells. Okay? So one big cell, the nucleus creates a second copy, and then it starts to pinch like a bubble. Those two copies separate, and until it eventually, this will keep squeezing until it pinches off. Okay? That's dividing. Now, budding is a different story. Budding works like this. Okay, here's the cell, okay, with the nucleus. Okay? Now, same thing happens. happens? The nucleus has to reproduce and make more DNA, right? A second copy of those instructions. Instead of beginning to split in half, it creates a little bulge off to the side like this. A little bubble. Okay? Then, as the DNA is being copied, it sends that second copy into the bubble. So this begins to grow a new nucleus like this. Well, over time, that nucleus gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and once it's the full size it needs to be, now it starts to build the outside, and eventually it will pinch off.
I think for a while it looks like a
Okay? So budding, kind of like how when a flower grows a little bud off to the side, and eventually it gets bigger, it's kind of like that. Okay? Starts as a little bubble or a bulge, it feeds DNA into it, and then pinches off. Pretty cool. Okay? Now, the three examples, paramecium, amoeba, and euglena. Now, I'm going to flip back to the slideshow. The words will be on there, so don't panic. Okay? But I want to show you the cool thing about those three things. Just wait. Okay. So real fast. This is what the mushrooms look like underneath. Okay? Inside of those little slits is where all the spores are tucked up inside. When the mushroom's ready, it will open those slits and allow the spores to fall out. Okay? When you stomp on it, you're spraying them out before it's ready. Okay? But Protista, here's the three types, the examples I gave you. Now, the only problem is these words are switched. This is the euglena and this is the amoeba, but this one is the paramecium. Okay? Now, what I want to tell you is each of these move in different ways. The paramecium, you see how he looks like kind of fuzzy? He has little hairs all over the outside of the cell. Those hairs work like little feet, and they help him kind of crawl along. Okay? That's how he moves. The euglena, on the other hand, we already discussed what this tail is called, right? What is this tail called? What's with an F? Matthew?
Paramecium?
No. Jacob?
Fungus?
No. It starts with an F and ends in agella.
Oh.
Matthew.
Flagella.
Flagella.
Oh.
Okay, that's the tail. That tail whips around like a propeller and pushes it through whatever it's traveling in. Right? Okay. But this is the cool one. I mean, they're all cool, but this one's cool. You see how it looks like a splash or a puddle?
Yeah.
Okay? Each of these little projections are called pseudopods. Say pseudopods. Okay? Pseudopods literally means false feet. So, the way the amoeba moves is like Spider-Man. He shoots those projections out to wherever it wants to go, and then it latches on and pulls the rest of its body with it. Don't care. Projection, latches on, pulls the body with it. Projection, latches on, pulls the body with it. Okay? That's how the amoeba moves. But notice that each of these are eukaryotic, in that they have a nucleus. Okay? As well as other little organelles in there. Brooklyn.
What? So you know how they look divided? What would that teach our body when it does that?
So like when we need to create more cells in our body, they usually divide like this. Yes.
Question on fungi. So when you keep mushrooms, then you clean the mushroom once, right? So once.
Kind of. If the spores are developed enough to where it will grow a new mushroom, then yes. But typically the mushroom will wait until, like, first of all, it's moist enough outside for the new mushroom to grow. There's enough water, wind that can carry the spores somewhere else, things like that.
We get a lot of mushrooms that won't taste well.
Well, now you can tell him that he's making it worse. All right. Going on to the last two, because we're running out of time, guys. Sorry. The last two, okay? So we just did all four of the kingdoms that are in domain Eukarya, okay? Now we're going down to kingdom Eubacteria, all right? These are organisms that do not have a nucleus, so they're prokaryotic. Pro meaning no nucleus, so we're down here. And they're unicellular, meaning they're made entirely of one cell. That one cell performs all functions of life. of them are autotrophs, but some can decompose other things, meaning they're hetero. So it could be either one, depending on what type of organism we're talking about within that domain or kingdom. They also reproduce by dividing, so that pinching off and splitting into two. And then for examples, there's two that we're going to write down. Blue-green algae, which is that kind of green slimy stuff you see on top of lakes and ponds. I'll show you a picture in a second. And E. coli. Now, E. coli is short for, I can't remember the whole name, but a type of bacteria that can give you food poisoning. Okay? If you remember a couple of years ago when Chipotle was really struggling to stay open, they kept getting shut down because their food was making everyone sick. They were having an infestation of E. coli. Okay? Now, they don't have that anymore, but the way that happens, it means like either the meat wasn't cooked all the way or the produce wasn't cleaned properly, things like that.
Wait, what was this?
Chipotle?
When was this?
Oh, a couple years ago.
I think like a month ago, a kid of 6 years of water had like a brain like eating.
Amoeba?
Yeah, amoeba.
Yeah, that's typically gotten from like ponds and lakes and stuff like that.
Yeah, and they found it from the water.
Mm-hmm. Now, the last thing we're going to write, off to the side, add one more box. We're going to add the unique characteristic for this one. That these have the cell walls made of peptidoglycan. Matthew?
Two things. One, why does the U bacteria just do dividing?
I don't know.
And two, I heard from a lot of like history books that blue-green algae was the first thing alive.
Really? Interesting. I guess if you believe in evolution, that might be the case. Which I don't personally, but could. Okay, and the last kingdom is Archaebacteria. Okay, these are also prokaryotic in that they have no nucleus, and they are unicellular. They also reproduce by dividing or budding. Dividing. They get energy by either being auto or heterotrophic, depending on the kind of organism. And then the two examples that we're going to write are words that we haven't come across yet. Okay, so I'm going to explain what they mean. So, examples, halophiles and thermophiles. Now, the Latin root word phile or phile means love. Halo means salt. So, a halophile is a salt-loving organism. Salt-loving. So, you would find these kinds of organisms in very salty environments. Thermophiles are heat-loving. So these are found in very hot environments. So below that, I want you to write those words. Therm, meaning heat. Halo, meaning salt. Okay, don't forget to write this part. And phile, meaning love. Okay, I'm going to show you the pictures of these organisms, and then I will take your questions.
And we have to pick.
I see that. Put it on the right way.
I got complimented.
Complimented? You mean complimented?
Yeah. It's not a beard. It's a man.
Get complimented. All right. Brian, you cracked me up. Okay, so pictures. Here's what blue-green algae looks like. It's green, kind of slimy, that stuff you find on top of lakes and ponds. Brian. Or scum, maybe. This is what E. coli looks like green little Cheetos. Okay? Now, that's what it looks like underneath a microscope, but inside your body it can make you very sick. Then for archaebacteria, here's what halophiles look like. You can see in the picture they kind of zoom into the microscopic spot there. That's what the organisms would look like on the salt. This is a salt-loving bacteria. Here's what thermophiles would look like under a microscope. Okay? So, those are the 6 kingdoms. On Tuesday, for online kids, Wednesday, we're going to talk about, we're going to go from kingdoms into the phyla, okay? So, from here on out, we're going to focus only on the Animalia kingdom, okay? So, we want to get a broad overview and know all the domains, know all of the kingdoms, but from here down, we're only going to focus here, okay? Alright, questions? Matthew. I know you don't pick up yet.
Would you find